Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our second Ukrainian Voices program. My name is Diana Price, and I am joined today by Vanessa Salo, also with Alexandria Library, and our special guest, Volodymyr Tretyak, who is a researcher and translator, and he is joining us today to discuss how Russians perceive Vladimir Putin. So take it away.
Hey everyone, and thanks Diana for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I find this is really nice what you're organizing, the Ukrainian Voices podcast or show or whatever you call it. I think this is really great that that you give an opportunity to people from Ukraine to say something louder. And yes, the topic is quite interesting. And even though I'm Ukrainian and this is Ukrainian Voices, but the topic is we will talk more about Russia, since I believe it's quite important since we discussed the war a lot. And I think it's also important to understand what kind of country Russia is, what's happening there, what kind of president they have, political culture. Everything is important because the problems that I usually have when I'm discussing the war with foreign friends, that they don't really understand what kind of country Russia is and what's happening there. They see it almost like, democracy, but with some limited rights, which is absolutely not. This is a dictatorship. And this is something me and also other Ukrainian voices have been loud about on social media. And I think this is a topic which should be mentioned more often. And in particular, today I wanted to talk about Vladimir Putin, about about the image he has in Russian society, how people see him, how they perceive him, and etc. Yes. So, okay. Let's start. So how they see their president? I would actually explain this through three concepts: how he sees himself, and also how they see him. It's defined through three concepts, which is one of them is like holiness in terms of holy person, obedience, and trust. And the first one, holiness, what I mean is that Putin himself, his public image is absolutely different from what can you see in a democratic Western society, not even Western in general, in democratic society, because for example, you can see your leader, I don't know, president or prime minister in casual context quite often. You can see, for example, I don't know, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I remember well, were coming to late night shows. Boris Johnson was driving bike, and examples like this is absolutely not possible in Russia, because Putin is always alone, and every time he is appearing in some casual context is absolutely staged. Even those people which are we seeing, they're absolutely the same. There have been proofs and evidence for that in pictures that the same person who was yesterday a construction worker tomorrow will be, I don't know, a soldier or someone else. And the only way we see Putin is in some kind of interview with some kind of imperial settings in a palace or something. And again, as I said, always with actors, and he tries to give this what would you say, vibe to the people that he absolutely dedicated to country and always alone. Also, he compares himself with, for example, with Peter the First, the Russian emperor. And in general, all these facts give the feeling to Russian people that he is like semi-divine person, kind of holy person, absolutely dedicated to the country. We also don't see him with family or something like that, children. he has children, 2 daughters officially, actually not officially, as they have different surnames. Yes, so, and this whole facts give it very, very, I would say, weird vibe, because, you know, this is not something we all used to. And this is also why it's hard to understand, because we grew up in a democratic society when we have an influence on the politics, and this is important. And in Russia, this is not the case. So yeah, that was the first fact. Yeah, by the way, if you want to question something, then you just go ahead. It's okay. And this first concept was wholeness, and the second thing that I want to mention is trust, because I think trust in Russia, in Putin from Russians is much higher than any other country. Why? Because they never had a political culture. It never existed in Russia. Up from Mongol era, it was constant autocracy. Russian tsars and USSR, now Putin, absolutely no influence, no political culture. And that's a big problem that I see. And there are many examples for that. One moment. I've written it on Twitter, and I looked at exact examples. For example, Russia is poor, right? Like, except Moscow, St. Petersburg, biggest cities, everything else is really poor. And by poor, I mean that really people have no heating, no gas, no proper roads. The life is really poor. The buildings, they just collapse in by itself. And there are many interviews with people, and like each person question himself or herself, why is that? Why do I live so poor, and who is guilty for that? And usually, of course, they say Ukraine, US is guilty, but sometimes they also say is local authorities is guilty, like local mayor or region governor, but they never say Putin is guilty. And this is also a key concept. There is this old phrase which comes from Tsarist Russia: if only the Tsar knew, which means like, if Putin knew that I'm living that poor, then he would come and help me. But he just doesn't know that we are so poor here, because he can see us from, from that behind, from Moscow. It's so far. For example, the one example that I have in mind is the video with old man from Kamchatka, which is like, I don't know, 7,000 kilometers from Moscow, 5, like extremely far. So, and this is the problem, that people have absolute trust in Putin, and for them he is not even like in politics. He's like beyond the whole political system. So he just a strong authoritarian leader, and during history, and because of history, because of all historical moments, I believe people have the feeling that a strong hand, like a strong authoritarian leader, is better than chaos, and that's what people think, and this is the problem, I guess. And yeah, again, key points to all the concepts that I mentioned is that no political culture ever existed, and it didn't appear in the 90s, which I guess many countries were hoping for, probably also many people in Russia, but it didn't happen. So basically, there is no generation that has raised and grew up in learning how to live democratically and how to do democracy, let's say, freedom and everything. Yeah. And also I have noted here the example from Kamchatka. Actually, the journalist asked the old man what do you think about Putin? Are you blaming him for that?" And he said, "No, I think Putin is great because he returned Crimea, because I think he is great, although he's like 10,000 of miles away from Crimea, but he feels this is great." And this is exactly what propaganda did also, in combination with those historical events. He doesn't see Putin responsible for his for his problems. I would say there are many of them, and this is the case. I have another example in mind where it was, I don't remember the city, although I noted it somewhere. Whatever. It was in Chelyabinsk region, a small town, and it has one of the worst ecologies in the world because of the factory. And there was like local activists who was against it, and he was protesting. And again, journalists asked him, "Do you blame Putin for this life, for all these problems?" And he said, "No, I'm voting for Putin. I voted for him last year, and I will vote again because we don't have World War III in Russia. NATO is not invading us." And he sees this as a Putin, yes, achievement, I would say. And this is again the thing, and the thing is that people live in constant fear also since ages. Yeah. This was regarding the trust concept. So first I said holiness, then we have trust, and we also have obedience, which is also massive and which also comes from earlier ages. And it was never those interrupted by a different political system or any other system, because when Tsarist Russia collapsed, USSR came, which was terrible in terms of, I don't know, freedom, your mind expression, and everything. There were some better moments maybe at the end of USSR, but in general, it was horrible, especially the Stalin era. Many people just died because of repressions. And again, here I'm talking about obedience. And shortly, I would say that the level of obedience is unimaginable for someone who lives in a Western country, because it's just unimaginable. I will tell even myself, I've met people that would say, even young people in my high school in Austria, that they from Russia, but they would say like, okay, I think Putin does this and that right, but in terms of foreign politics, but not internal. So this is really questionable. And again, same reason, no political culture. And this, I believe there is another thing, that people feel that they owe something to the president. It comes from there, and it comes again from USSR times. You have an idol, you have someone who is like really big, like, 1984 book, kind of big brother, that you have to be sacrificing for him something. And this is exactly the opposite of what it should work, because the leader has to be the servant of the people. It's, by the way, exactly the way Zelensky's party is called. However, in Russia, it's not the case, and there is just submission to the supreme power. And I've also seen the surveys, and people say that there was like 60% of Russian would support if Putin will stop the war, but also 60% of Russians will supported their decision to start the war. So whatever the decision he makes, he will get the support, I believe. I believe if he declares now the victory, they just all go home, the Russian forces from Ukraine. I believe the Russia will not collapse. And this will be supported, maybe not by all people, but definitely they will be a big part of society. And many of them might have had different attitude earlier to this. So same, we can see there is a mobilization in Russia which started in September or October, I think actually September, I don't remember exactly. But, and many said that it might, there will be a big collapse, many protests. They were not that many. They were, I think, very few. Same with war, and same, I think, I will tell you honest, I will be honest with you, same as other people in foreign countries, I believe that maybe at the beginning of the war that people will stand up more and they will protest this decision. But I feel like many people, maybe they don't even supported this, but many of them, of course, many supported, but I think many just accepted because it was, because, you know, the Tsar knows better what is good for us. Yes, so this is what I feel important. Let me check if I wanted to say anything else. Oh. So yes, this Russia again is a totalitarian regime with zero of democracy. And yes, people have accepted all these atrocities offered to them. And yes, I reflected quite a lot of history on this one, but I think history kind of declares it. Also, again, keep in mind, Russia was never, even since ancient times, like most developed countries were not somewhere near nowadays Russia is, like ancient Greece or ancient Rome. And yes, this tradition of strong leader, I think, is quite deep in society, and I think they didn't really get rid of it. And very quickly after Soviet Union collapse, Russia just returned to something which is, I guess, even worse, maybe, that Soviet Union in the late 80s. Yes, I wanted to say, also, by the way, there is very interesting video which I also have somewhere on my page. I think I've translated that one. Putin had, in 1996, Putin said that we can do at that time he was not even a president. I think he was like FSB, which is like former KGB, what is called, not leader, president or whatever. And he said that we can quickly make order with an iron hand, but very quick this iron hand will start to suppress us. And this is exactly what happened when he came to power. He kind of make some order. There were, I guess, there were some basic improvements, but very quick, like in a few years, in 2-3 years, he started to suppress people. And so far it have been 30, I think 4 years since he's suppressing people. So, and this is really unfortunate that we are observing such basically absolutely totalitarian case in 21st century. Yes. Do you have some questions maybe or discussions?
Thank you so much, Volodymyr. I do have a question. I know, like, in the early 2000s, at least towards Western media, Putin really had like this hyper masculine kind of persona. I think we all remember that photo of him shirtless on the horse that kind of became how we kind of imagined him. And it seems like now he has more, like you were saying, like a holy persona.
Mhm.
Is that something you agree with, that his like, how he's portrayed has changed? And do you think that might be kind of in relation to him getting older and no longer being able to be like that more youthful, like hyper masculine guy riding horses? It also seemed like maybe recently he was having some health issues that were pointed out in some videos of him. So do you think that, I guess my question is, like, do you think his persona has changed or how he's presenting himself? Or is it different to Russians versus to the West?
That's a good question. Well, first, I think he did change the way he presents himself. I think at the beginning of his career, he was still closer on to society, a bit to people. He tried to be closer, and I think he also, this masculinity was also the thing, and now he tries to go more in this, like wise man knows everything direction. Yes, and also, so I agree with this. And also regarding health issues, I really don't know, because there are so many speculations. And basically, I think since the beginning of the war, I have seen like 10 times that Putin will die, will pass away in like few months, that he has cancer, and he's very close to death, but he's still not dying. So yeah, probably it's something we will not know soon. But I wouldn't expect him, let's say, to die easily, because probably he has the best medicine available in Russia. Probably maybe he has the own clinic or the own hospital. So it's not something I think we should hope for now.
You mentioned Putin kind of comparing himself to Peter the First, which I feel like a lot of Western people know that Tsar of Russia as Peter the Great. And
Mm.
he was really well known for not just kind of the military campaigns, especially in Ukraine, but also for kind of westernizing and modernizing Russia, I guess. Do you feel that he's trying to draw that comparison just in terms of kind of like military prowess, or also with kind of modernizing current Russia?
Well, the Peter the First was very significant person in Russia, because he actually turned the Tsar, what is the Tsar Russia to Empire Russia, which was very significant event. So he definitely like one of the most significant Russian rulers from all the times. And I think this is like his significance is something what is attracting Putin to compare him. And also I've seen many, now they use Peter the First a lot in the propaganda posters in the cities. And I think this significance, and also, yes, he got new lands, a lot of lands, but also, yes, he westernized Russia. He traveled a lot into Western Europe, especially, I guess, I've never been to St. Petersburg, but as far as I know, it was built on the example of Amsterdam, because Amsterdam at that time was like, Netherlands was very, very developed country. It was a golden age of Netherlands. And yes, but he was also a very, very brutal ruler, Peter the First. So he was not Western in terms of like freedom, although I wouldn't really say at that time West was what we know now. But again, yeah, I think Putin likes the significance of Peter the First, and secondly, that he really got a lot of new territories, and yeah, he invaded and he captured, and he has got what they call in Russia window into Europe, which is this part of Russia which connects Europe to the sea, to the Baltic Sea. So I think this is important. I think Putin actually said explicitly that, what did he say? He said that Peter the First was returning the lands of our people and make it more like stronger. So that was his, I think, exact point. That, yeah. And he was comparing it to Ukraine, that Putin is kind of like returning Ukraine with Russian people to him. And yeah, so that was his main comparison.
Do you think that, I guess, there is a link between how, I guess, authoritarian the government in Russia is and how scary it can be to dissent with the amount of people that support the government? Do you think there might be like kind of a Stockholm Syndrome effect going on where people are so afraid to dissent that they end up just going along with what's happening and starting to believe and support the government? Because do you think that, I guess, people feel like so afraid of going against the government, they kind of convince themselves just to support whatever they're doing?
Do you mean like they support the government because they're afraid to recognize that what it's doing is false, or?
Yeah. Also, I guess with Stockholm Syndrome, you're so afraid of you're being, I guess, your captor is the whole thing, and you're afraid to go against what your captors say. You start to go along with them because it's a survival instinct for your brain. Do you think that that might be something that's happening in Russia with because it's so scary to dissent? I remember there's just a story about, I guess, the man's daughter who drew a photo that or a picture that seemed to um, go against the war in Ukraine, and he ended up getting arrested. Like that level of terror that people just like they don't even think about dissenting.
Yeah, this is a crazy story, one of many, unfortunately. I think that is the case to a certain amount of people, but I think they also kind of learn it during the Putin era because, like, it was always told to people in Russia, you just like, you don't go into politics and you have like your life, we will not, touch you. So like, and they really learn to be how to be, I think they say oft, apolitical, so not political. Like if politics are somewhere else, if they're not part of your life. I think there is even a meme that I have recently seen, like it's a bit of a dark meme, but I think it's okay if I tell it now. Child goes with father in a bus, and the child asks the father, where are we going, daddy? And he said, I don't know, I'm not interested into politics, but they were going to a concentration camp. So this is kind of what it brings you when you're saying, I'm not interested, I'm not into politics. And yes, I think many people just decided for themselves, I will be quiet and I will have my life. But yes, they learn it, and what it brought that now you cannot have your life because you will be sent to fight the war. So yes, probably many people learn how to get quiet. I'm sure some people are still like against it, but they just cannot do anything. I guess some people left Russia, some just stayed silent. So, but also it's really hard to talk about exact numbers because because telling that you are against is dangerous. Leaving might not always be possible, and I guess there is no independent survey. I'm not sure, maybe there is one. So it's kind of very hard question and situation to really find out who is who and who is supporting what.
Yeah, building off of what Diana said, I've been surprised by a lot of reactions to the war in Ukraine, especially initially in the West and everything. But probably what surprised me most was all of the initial protests that they had in Russia. Were you surprised with that as well, or were you expecting protests in Russia in response?
I was, you mean protests against the war, right?
Yes.
I was expecting more than I have seen them, to be honest, because I have seen, when Maidan was in Ukraine, I was, I think, 16 years old or 15 years old, and it was really massive. I think I haven't known anyone who wouldn't go, who wouldn't participate, who wouldn't do like anything at least. So everyone was like motivated, and also, but I think this was still rather some part of people, but it was not massive, like in terms of massive, For example, if you compare to protests in Belarus 2020, population-wise, percentage-wise, there were more people than we have seen in Russia. When was it? 1 year ago? Actually more so far. So yes, and also keep in mind, Moscow is the biggest, probably after Istanbul, is the biggest city in Europe. It's huge. It's like 15 million people. So there should have been like thousands. Even thousands wouldn't be like very massive, So that's the point. And what I remember though is 2014. There were, if you know Boris Nemtsov, the Russian opposition, who was killed 2015, but in 2014 he managed to organize quite a big protest. I think that was like 20,000, 30,000. I don't remember exactly, but that one was massive. And after that, there wasn't. Of course, it's also Putin achievement for him that the people are not coming anymore. But also, I think people had to have more, what would you call it, more bravery. Yeah, but again, I think everyone thought, okay, I'll just stay quiet and then maybe it will go away, but it didn't. In any political regime, based on history, the longer you stay quiet, the worse it will get. And the earlier you start to be loud, like Ukraine in 2013, then the more chances you have to win this fight against oppression. Because I believe if Ukraine wouldn't do what it did in 2013-14, the Maidan revolution of dignity, now Ukraine would be somewhere near Lukashenko's Belarus, probably already invading Moldova or something. Yeah, hard to predict. History doesn't have this theoretical approach, but it's something like that. I think that was important to do.
From what you've shared today, it seems like there's really a cult of personality around Vladimir Putin, that he as a person kind of is really at the center of the Russian government right now. What do you have any ideas of what you think might happen if he dies? Like, is there someone else that could fill that void?
This is incredibly good question, and I think there is no right answer to that, because it's future and it's always unpredictable. I believe 100 years ago, when Tsarist Russia collapsed and USSR erased, was created, it wasn't really predicted, because that was. Then I think actually if Putin dies, I think kind of everything can happen. It might turn that Russia will get even more fascist country. For example, some radical forces will take over, like Prigozhin and his Wagner private army. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see the way, for example, if Putin dies tomorrow, how liberal forces in Russia can come to power. I don't really have that in mind, although it's something probably that I would prefer, but I don't really see how it can be possible. So I don't know. Although some people say that it's so personalized, this dictatorship, that it will not exist without Putin. But on the other hand, there have been many dictatorships in Russia, many dictators, and somehow it did survive. So it's really hard to make predictions. For example, when Stalin died in 1953, there was a de-Stalinization part after that. Like for several years, it was a bit. It wasn't, of course, it didn't turn out to a democracy or something like that, but it got better comparing to Stalin time. And Stalin was also announced as like it was said loudly that he did crimes and that and this. But again, this is future, and future is something we don't really know. So again, shortly, I would just say everything can happen. We cannot exclude everything, and yeah, we will see.
I do have one more question. It sounds like from what you were sharing today that um, Putin is very in control of not only, I guess, of how he presents when he goes to like events, but also how he's presented in the media. I know that it sounds like a lot of Russian media is kind of propaganda for Putin's government.
Yeah, all of
Do you,
them.
yeah. My question, I guess, was is there like any independent media in Russia, or is that kind of illegal and things are maybe slipping through the cracks? But
As far as I know, after the war started, all the remainings of independent media were banned, declared illegal. Not even media, even like human rights organizations were also declared illegal. There is one organization which they were researching Soviet crimes, and it also banned in Russia. And I think they're the founder of the organization is still in prison. I think it's called Memorandum, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, now there is Russian media who work in exile. Media Zona, I think, Medusa, several of them, Insider. I think they did some good research, but again, in Russia, they all banned, and I think you cannot even access them easily. I think you need to install VPN or something. Oh yeah, well, maybe on social media you can check them easier, but also many social medias are now banned, I think, in Russia. So yeah, it's really got tight after the war. I think all the remainings of media got banned. So it's really basically another problem for all that I said earlier, obedience and trust, that there is basically no source where the information can come through. There is some sources, of course. There is internet, and internet you can find everything, but still people are usually don't consuming fair news. And TV, I think, is very popular, and as I said before, Russia is poor, and I guess many people don't use internet, they just watch TV, and TV is absolutely controlled by Kremlin by 100%. I think there is no channels left which would have a different position on war. So again, many people watch TV, and this is the problem.
Do you think in general, in Russia, that kind of Putin's image has been improved by the war? Or do you think that, just like you said before, that whatever, he says, they'll just automatically go along with?
I think it didn't change much, but I would say it's rather what is the opposite of improve? Disprove?
get
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah, so it got worse, rather, because, for example, if someone of your relatives goes to war and he doesn't return from it, maybe people will ask questions. at least themselves, maybe not, they will not question Putin, but they will ask themselves, why did he go? Why did he reach there? Why did we do this and that? So I would say his reputation might slightly getting worse, but not exactly significant. Also, people see that there are no, like, the war is ongoing. There is no goal defined still. Like every 2 months they say different goals. Sometimes first he said denazification of Ukraine. Then he said to liberate in people Donbass. Then he said another thing. Then have next other regions which are not Donbass. So I think it's very hard to do something when you don't have when you don't understand your goal, and this is also what people are facing. They don't know why. But unfortunately, again, on the opposite side, I am afraid many people still go to Ukraine and they believe they go to defend their motherland, and they cross the border to another country. And this, I think this is a real disaster that in 21st century we came to this, that really one goes to foreign country and he still believes, I guess there are quite enough soldiers who have this in mind, that they believe they defend their country by actually being in another one. So yeah, I don't remember what was the original question. Okay, his rating, I think, is a little bit getting worse, but not much.
This is a little slightly off topic, but we discussed how effective propaganda is within Russia.
Mm.
Do you have an opinion on how effective Russian propaganda is in the West? I know that since the Russia invaded Ukraine, like RT News has pretty much been banned, but I know that that was kind of a really popular, like, alternative news source that told the truth about America, maybe like in the early 2000s, 2010s. And I know that even like in 2014, with the invasion of Crimea, the passenger plane that was shot down, like there was this whole debate, who could have done it? Who could possibly have done it? And then I read recently, like after Russia invaded Ukraine again, oh, obviously it was Russia. So it seems like propaganda from Russia to the West has been rather successful, at least until very recently.
Yes, this is also a very interesting topic, how Russia did their propaganda. And I would say, as exactly as I don't know about the US exactly, but in Europe, many people also were looking for this alternative media or alternative view, whatever they called. And I've met one person myself like this, and he said all Western media are lying and Russian media have like alternative view, and was a bit it's just, you know, yeah. So he really believed, like, in what's, for example, Russia Today, I think, was popular among this. It's usually are like, I know I can talk about German speaking area, these are usually far right parties or far right party supporters, which also comes along with anti-vax movement in Russia, and anti-EU and anti-immigration. I think those four things kind of correlate with others, and I guess Russian propaganda was quite successful on this. Now it's banned, and now I think many, like, Ukrainian voices got a bit louder since the war. I also think there was a very good work done from Ukrainian government, from Ukrainian media, also from president, that really like being loud about real facts. But yeah, coming back to 2014, the situation for Ukraine was not very good, because Europe was like Europe and world, also Western world, was very neutral, I would say. Like, okay, there is like some conflict. I don't know who's guilty, who did what, whose fault is that. So yeah, and this was, I think, an achievement from Russian medias, from Russian propaganda. They were definitely louder than Ukrainian media before that time. I think maybe, of course, last year, maybe a few years before, it got a bit better, but before, Russian propaganda was very, very strong. Of course, not all the people watch them in the West, but still some groups were really actively following it. And I remember also seeing like complaints, why would you ban Russia today in Europe? So yeah, but why wouldn't you ban them if they publicly call to, to kill people? So this is important, and I think it's good that they finally got banned, because it's just yeah, it's state media, state controlled. It's almost the same as Russian, as other channels from Russian TV. So it's good that they banned, and yes, I agree with you, Russian propaganda was quite successful. I'm also, by the way, I've also another example from which might be useful to mention at the end. I'm translating a lot of videos from war, and many from Russia, and I've seen many videos where, for example, wives of soldiers will record video for Putin, and they will say, "Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, Putin, please give extra ammunition to our husbands, and all the stuff like that." So this is another evidence, another proof for all my theories, that they don't really see Putin like responsible for something. They don't ask him to stop the wars. They just ask to support their husbands better, or move them to a defensive position, something like that. So this is a problem. And I guess, like, after Nazi Germany was freed by Alliance forces, the people have been denazified, like there was added education system, but I'm pretty sure it will not happen in Russia. So I don't really see how they will get another view, how they will like get more, how will they accept freedom, and etc. This is something we will face after the war. Now we have another things to think about.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Volodymyr. And we really appreciate you sharing all of your research and insights with us. And we're so happy that you could speak with us today.
Yeah, it's so great for having me. I hope it was not too boring for you.
I
And
was fascinated.
Yeah, absolutely.
great. Well, then thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward for the video to share it with my friends, followers, and whatever.
Thank you.